A millionaire was shocked when he entered a luxury restaurant and saw his ex-fiancée, whom he had abandoned 5 years ago, accompanied by a boy who looked exactly like him. Before we start the story, let us know in the comments, which city are you watching from? Enjoy the story, everyone. Richard Foster, a young millionaire CEO, looked at Emily, his fiancée, with cold eyes, trying to hide the inner turmoil consuming him. He had made a tough decision, but in his view, a necessary one. "This isn't working, Emily. It's better if we end this here," he said, unable to meet her gaze. Emily was stunned. The air around her seemed to vanish, and her racing heart beat erratically. "You're breaking up with me? After everything we've been through?" Her voice trembled, but there was a trace of indignation in her tone. Richard took a step back, avoiding her eyes. He knew his decision didn't come from the heart, but from external pressures. His family had never accepted Emily, deeming her unfit for someone of his status. "She's just an ordinary girl with no name or fortune," they had said. "My family is right, Emily. We're from different worlds. This would never work." The words echoed like a death sentence in her heart. Emily, who had always taken pride in her independence, now felt vulnerable and betrayed. She knew Richard was merely repeating what his family had drilled into him, but that didn't make the pain any less real. "You're letting your family decide your life?" She stepped forward, her teary eyes fixed on his. "I thought you were stronger than this, Richard." He remained silent, unable to reply. Emily took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She knew it was useless to plead or try to convince him. The decision had already been made. "Fine. If you think this is for the best, then go ahead," she said in a barely audible voice. Richard glanced at her one last time before leaving. Every step he took felt like a definitive farewell. As the door closed, Emily collapsed onto the sofa, letting her tears fall freely. Her modest apartment, once cozy, now felt small and suffocating. She looked at the engagement ring on her finger and, with a decisive motion, removed it. Later that night, while staring blankly at the ceiling, Emily's phone buzzed beside her. It was an unexpected call. Her parents, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. "Emily, we need to talk." "Come home," her father's firm voice said. Emily hesitated, but something in the urgency of his tone made her reconsider. Perhaps it was time to face her past and, just maybe, find a new direction for her life. When Emily arrived at her parents' house, she paused for a few minutes before stepping inside, taking a deep breath. The large door was opened by a butler, who greeted her with a slight nod. The familiarity of the place brought back memories, but she remained resolute. It was time to face her family and uncover the reason behind this sudden summons. In the main hall, her parents awaited her. Her father, Charles Carter, sat in a leather armchair, his expression serious, while her mother, Victoria, maintained an elegant and composed demeanor beside him. "Emily, I'm glad you came," Charles said, breaking the silence. "I thought I made it clear I wouldn't be coming back," she replied, crossing her arms. Victoria rose and approached her daughter, her eyes shimmering with a mix of relief and concern. "We know we've made mistakes in the past, dear, but we need you now," Victoria said, her voice gentle yet unmistakably urgent. Emily raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Since when did her parents need her? They had always been the unshakable pillars of the Carter empire, running a vast network of companies with an iron grip. "You need me? For what?" she asked, her skepticism evident. Charles adjusted himself in the armchair and took a deep breath before answering. "I want you to take over as president of the holding company." Shock flickered in Emily's eyes. She'd spent years trying to escape the weight of the Carter name, and now they were asking her to step into the heart of it all. "Why me? You always said I wasn't fit for the business," she retorted, her voice laced with resentment. "Because you're the only one who can do it now," Charles replied gravely. "I'm getting old, Emily, and your mother and I know we can't trust anyone else with this responsibility." Emily hesitated. The thought of taking on such a significant role and returning to the corporate world unsettled her, but at the same time, something inside her whispered that perhaps it was time to stop running. "And if I say I don't want to?" she challenged, folding her arms. "Then we'll keep asking until you reconsider," Victoria said with a faint smile. "But we know you won't let us down." Silence hung in the air for a few moments. Emily knew the decision wouldn't be easy, but a part of her, still hurt by the breakup with Richard and the pressure she had endured, wanted to prove she was capable of much more than he and his family had ever imagined. "Very well, but we'll do this my way," she declared firmly. Charles smiled for the first time since her arrival. He knew that once Emily made a decision, no one could change her mind. In the days that followed, Emily immersed herself in the holding company's business. The numbers, the reports, the endless meetings, everything reminded her of how intense the corporate world could be, but also how challenging and rewarding it was. She felt like she was regaining control of her life, building a new version of herself. Years after her breakup with Richard, Emily Carter's life had changed drastically. Now, as the president of the Carter Holding Company, she commanded a vast empire with confidence and authority. But that evening, all she wanted was a quiet dinner with Noah, her 5-year-old son, at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Emily entered hand in hand with Noah, drawing curious glances. Dressed in an elegant black dress, she exuded confidence. Noah, on the other hand, was full of the energy typical of a child, observing everything with curiosity. With his innocent smile and striking features, it was impossible to ignore how much he resembled Richard. They settled at a table near the window, where Noah quickly began asking questions about the city view. Emily answered patiently, feeling grateful for those peaceful moments with her son. However, fate seemed to have other plans for the evening. As Emily sipped her wine, the restaurant door opened, and Richard Foster walked in with 2 investors. He still carried the same commanding presence, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression sharp and focused. Emily froze for a moment upon seeing him, but quickly regained her composure, determined not to let his presence disturb her peace. Richard didn't notice her at first, fully engrossed in his business meeting, until the waiter guided him to a table nearby. That's when he saw her. Emily, elegantly seated with a glass of wine in hand, accompanied by a boy who looked strikingly like him. The shock was instant. For a moment, Richard was paralyzed. His eyes shifted from Emily to the boy beside her, and he felt the ground tremble beneath him. Emily noticed the surprise and confusion on Richard's face, but maintained her poise. She calmly picked up her wine glass and took a sip, deliberately ignoring his presence. Richard, unable to look away, felt a whirlwind of emotions consuming him. Memories of their breakup, the cold way he had left her, and the harsh words he had spoken, came rushing back. Now seeing her there, beautiful, composed, and with a boy who bore such a striking resemblance to him, those memories haunted him. He couldn't focus on the conversation with the investors. His curiosity and unease grew with each passing second. Who was the boy? Could he possibly be his son? The thought disturbed him, but it made sense. Emily continued to ignore Richard, focusing her attention on Noah, who was chattering about the piano. Still, she could feel his gaze burning into her, and that gave her a sense of control. It was exactly how she wanted it. After several long minutes, Richard couldn't take it any longer. He excused himself from the investors and walked over to Emily's table, trying to regain his composure before speaking. "Emily." She looked up, feigning surprise at seeing him. "Richard, what an unexpected coincidence." "Coincidence?" He raised an eyebrow, glancing briefly at Noah, who was now curiously observing the stranger. "Are you? Well?" "Very well, thank you. And you?" She kept her tone polite, but there was a hint of irony in her words. Richard hesitated. He knew it wasn't the right time for direct questions, but he couldn't help himself. He glanced at the boy again, and his voice came out softer than he intended. "Who is he?" Emily leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Richard. "This is Noah, my son." Richard felt those words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He looked at Noah again, who was now nibbling on a piece of bread, completely unaware of the weight of the conversation. "Your son?" he repeated, incredulous. "Yes, my son," Emily affirmed firmly. Richard's mind raced. The boy was 5 years old, the exact time since he and Emily had broken up. The dates matched, and the physical resemblance was undeniable. Richard began, but Emily cut him off. "Not here, Richard. This isn't the place for that kind of conversation." He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside him. Emily was right. The restaurant wasn't the place for confrontations or difficult questions. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calmer now, but still urgent. "Perhaps," Emily replied, lifting her chin slightly. "But on my terms?" not yours. Richard knew he had no choice. Emily was clearly in control, and he couldn't force anything here. Fine, I'll be waiting, he said before stepping away, returning to his table, though his thoughts were consumed by the revelation he had just received. Meanwhile, Emily watched Richard from the corner of her eye. She knew the encounter had unsettled him, and though she had anticipated this moment for years, now that it had arrived, she felt strangely calm. Noah, oblivious to the tension in the air, took Emily's hand and smiled. "Mommy, can I play the piano?" She smiled back, stroking his hair. "Of course, my love." As Noah ran toward the piano, Emily took a deep breath. The battle with Richard was only beginning, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Richard Foster couldn't sleep that night. Emily's words echoed in his mind, and the image of Noah, so much like him, wouldn't leave him alone. The suspicion that the boy might be his son consumed him. He knew he had to act, but the approach needed to be cautious. Emily was no longer the simple young woman he thought he knew. Now she was a powerful businesswoman, and Richard needed to be sure before confronting her again. The next morning, Richard called his trusted team together. "I need detailed information on Emily Carter," he declared, his tone leaving no room for questions. "I want to know everything that's happened to her over the past 5 years." His assistants quickly got to work, and within hours, reports began to arrive. Richard reviewed the documents carefully, each page revealing a new facet of Emily's life. Not only had she taken over as president of the Carter Holding Company, but she had also led impressive business expansions. Under her leadership, the company had flourished, solidifying its position as one of the largest in the country. Among the reports, something caught his attention: medical and travel records. In the months following their breakup, Emily had secretly visited a private clinic. Richard frowned, intrigued, and ordered his team to dig deeper. By early afternoon, one of his assistants returned with additional information. "Mr. Foster, it seems Emily visited the clinic for prenatal care. The dates coincide with the time when you were still together," the assistant reported, handing over more documents. Richard felt the weight of confirmation. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. Noah wasn't just similar to him, everything pointed to the boy being his son. Determined not to waste any more time, Richard decided to visit the clinic for further answers. Using his influence, he gained access to Emily's medical records. The final confirmation came in the form of a DNA test attached to the file. The result was undeniable. Noah Smith was his biological son. The initial shock gave way to a wave of guilt and regret. Richard recalled the day he ended things with Emily, how he had judged her for living a simple life, and the pressure from his family. He realized that by succumbing to their manipulation, he had not only lost Emily but also missed the first years of his son's life. But what troubled him most was the question: why hadn't Emily ever told him the truth? Determined to confront her, Richard called his secretary and scheduled an urgent meeting with Emily under the pretext of discussing business. When he arrived at the Carter Holding Company's boardroom, he was greeted by Emily herself, who seemed to already know the reason for his visit. "Richard, I didn't expect to see you again so soon," she said, her tone composed. "We need to talk, and you know it's not about business," he said bluntly. Emily remained silent for a few seconds before motioning for him to sit. She closed the door, crossed her arms, and waited for him to start. "Noah is my son, isn't he?" Richard asked, cutting straight to the point. Emily showed no surprise. She had already anticipated that he would discover the truth sooner or later. "Yes, he is," she replied firmly. The confirmation, though expected, hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He felt his breath hitch for a moment, but quickly composed himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice carried a mixture of pain and frustration. "I had the right to know, Emily." "Did you?" she retorted with a bitter laugh. "After the way you left me? After abandoning me because your precious family decided I wasn't good enough for you?" Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He knew Emily was right. "I did what I thought was right at the time," he admitted, lowering his gaze. "But I was wrong." Emily took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions from spilling over. "I chose to raise Noah on my own because I knew that if I relied on you or your family, he'd become just another pawn in their game." I wasn't going to let that happen to my son." Richard felt the weight of her words. He had never considered how his family's influence might have driven Emily to keep him away. "I want to be part of his life," Richard said, his voice resolute. "I want to make up for lost time, Emily." She studied him for a moment, searching his eyes for sincerity. "Being part of Noah's life isn't that simple, Richard. You'll have to prove that you've changed, that you're no longer the weak man who let himself be manipulated." "And I will prove it," he promised. Emily knew this was just the first of many difficult conversations they would have. While she was willing to give Richard a chance to redeem himself, she was equally determined to protect Noah from any negative influences. After the revelation, Richard spent most of the night alone in his office, lost in thought. The confirmation that Noah was his son still haunted him. But what troubled him more was Emily's coldness. Though he understood the reason for her resentment, he knew regaining her trust would be a challenging task. The next morning, Richard decided to take the first step toward building a connection with Noah. He called Emily, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. It wouldn't be easy. Determined not to give up, he sent a short but direct message. "I want to see Noah. Tell me when and where." Emily read the message while having coffee on her balcony. She knew Richard wouldn't back down. Deep down, she also understood that sooner or later she would have to let him meet their son. Sighing, she replied, "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Park. Come alone." The next day, Richard arrived at the park a few minutes early. He wore casual clothes, a rare sight for him, but he wanted to make a good impression. From a distance, he saw Emily sitting on a bench while Noah played on the nearby grass. Richard's heart raced as he watched the boy, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what his life might have been like had he known about his son from the start. "You're late," Emily said as he approached, though she knew it wasn't true. "I got here early but didn't want to interrupt," he replied. Trying to keep his tone light, Emily looked at him for a moment, as if assessing his sincerity, before calling out to Noah. "Noah, come here, sweetheart." The boy ran over to his mother, his face glowing with the innocent smile of a child. He stopped beside Emily, holding her hand, and looked at Richard with curiosity. "This is Richard," Emily said calmly. "He wants to meet you." Noah frowned for a moment before giving a shy smile. "Hi, Richard." Richard crouched to the boy's level, feeling a wave of emotion hearing Noah's voice for the first time. "Hi, Noah. It's a pleasure to meet you." The boy giggled softly, clearly more interested in going back to playing. "Do you want to play with me?" Noah asked, holding up a colorful ball. Richard smiled. "Sure, let's play." As they played, Emily watched from a distance, her emotions conflicted. Seeing Richard with Noah felt strange, but she couldn't deny there was something natural about their connection. Noah seemed comfortable, and for the first time, Richard appeared less rigid, almost human. After an hour, Noah ran back to Emily, tired but happy. "Mommy, he's really good at playing ball," the boy said excitedly. Emily smiled and tousled his hair. "I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart." Richard walked over, taking a deep breath. He knew the moment couldn't last forever, but there was something important he needed to say. "Emily, thank you for letting me meet him. It means more to me than you know." She looked at him, her expression serious. "Richard, let me make one thing clear. Just because I let you see Noah today doesn't mean everything is resolved. You still have a lot to prove." "I know," he said firmly, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." "I hope so, because I won't tolerate empty promises," she replied before taking Noah's hand. "Come on, sweetheart. It's time to go home." As Richard watched Emily and Noah walk away, he felt a mix of hope and determination. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he was resolved to win back not only Emily, but also his right to be Noah's father. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. After the meeting in the park, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Noah and Emily. The feeling of having missed crucial years of his son's life consumed him. And he knew he needed to understand what had happened during the time they were apart. Determined to fill in the gaps, he hired a private investigator to delve into the years when Emily had vanished from his life. 2 days later, the investigator handed over a detailed report filled with information that left Richard both intrigued and, at times, stunned. Emily had faced significant challenges, especially in choosing to raise Noah on her own. The report revealed frequent visits to medical clinics during her pregnancy and pediatric hospitals in Noah's early years. The boy had apparently suffered respiratory complications shortly after birth. But Emily, with resilience, had overcome it all without seeking any support. Richard couldn't help but blame himself. While he had been living comfortably in his corporate bubble, Emily had faced the hardships of motherhood alone. More than ever, he felt the need to make things right. The next morning, Richard arrived at the Carter Holding Company building unannounced. He knew Emily would receive him cautiously, but he could no longer delay the conversation. Upon entering the reception area, he was met with wary looks from the employees, who clearly recognized him. "Mr. Foster, Miss Carter is in a meeting," the receptionist informed him nervously. "She'll see me. Just let her know I'm here," he replied firmly. A few minutes later, Emily's office door opened. She was as elegant as ever, but her expression showed irritation. "Richard, what do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms. He stepped into the office without being invited and closed the door behind him. "I want to understand what really happened, Emily. I've read the reports. I know what you went through, and I know I was a coward for leaving you that day. But I need to hear it from you, not from documents." Emily sighed, clearly annoyed, but motioned for him to sit. After a few moments of silence, she began. "When you left me, Richard, my priority was to protect Noah. I knew your family would try to control him if they found out about his existence. I didn't want him to be used as a pawn in their power games." She paused, looking out the window, before continuing. "I decided to go it alone because it was what was best for him. My father tried to convince me to tell you everything, but I didn't trust that you could stand up to your family for us. And honestly, I didn't want to rely on someone who abandoned me so easily." Her words cut deep, but Richard knew he deserved every one of them. "You're right. I was weak," he admitted, his voice low. "But things have changed, Emily. I've changed, and I want to be there, not just as a father, but to truly support both of you." Emily studied him, gauging his sincerity. Despite all the pain, she could see that something in Richard had shifted. But trusting him again was a different matter. "Words are easy, Richard. I won't risk Noah's well-being for empty promises. If you want to be part of his life, you'll have to prove it, not just to me, but to him." "And I will," Richard said firmly. Emily leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. There was something in her expression that Richard couldn't quite read. "Noah is a brilliant child, but he's sensitive," she said. "If you come into his life and then leave, it could break him." "I won't let that happen." Richard nodded. "I understand. And I give you my word. I'm not going anywhere." A heavy silence hung between them before Emily finally shifted the conversation. "There's something you need to know," she said hesitantly. "After you left, my mother tried to intervene. She thought she should tell your family about Noah, but I stopped her. I don't know if they know, but if they do, it could make things even more complicated." Richard frowned. The idea that his family might know about Noah and had done nothing disturbed him, but he also knew how manipulative they could be. "Whatever they know, it doesn't matter. I'll protect Noah from any influence they might try to exert," he assured her. Emily still seemed skeptical, but there was something in Richard's eyes that made her believe he was being honest. "I hope you keep that promise, Richard, because if you don't, I won't have any mercy on you," she said coldly. Richard nodded, rising from his chair. "You'll see I mean it, Emily." He left her office with a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's words echoed in his mind, and he knew that to regain her trust and his place in Noah's life, he'd have to face his past and prove he was ready to be the father and partner they deserved. After leaving Emily's office, Richard knew he couldn't waste any time. Earning her trust was only part of the challenge. Most importantly, he needed to build a connection with Noah. It was clear the boy was curious, but cautious around strangers, meaning every interaction would have to be carefully and thoughtfully crafted. The next day, Richard reached out to Emily again, suggesting a more relaxed outing where he could spend more time with his son. After some hesitation, she agreed, but made it clear that this didn't mean he would have a permanent role in Noah's life. Tomorrow at 10 a.m.? At the zoo? Emily said, Noah loves animals, and it's a place where he can feel comfortable. Richard agreed without hesitation. He knew that every moment was an opportunity to strengthen his bond with his son. The following morning, Richard arrived at the zoo promptly. He wore casual clothes and carried a cap to shield himself from the sun, an unusual sight for someone used to boardrooms. When he spotted Emily and Noah at the entrance, he felt a mix of nervousness and hope. Noah was excited, holding a zoo map and chattering non-stop about the animals he wanted to see. When he saw Richard approaching, the boy waved shyly but with a genuine smile. "You came," Noah said enthusiastically. "Of course I did," Richard replied, kneeling to the boy's level. "I wouldn't miss the chance to see all these animals with you." Emily watched the interaction from a distance, remaining vigilant. As much as she wanted Noah to have a positive relationship with Richard, caution was still her greatest ally. The trio began their tour at the big cat habitats. Noah was fascinated by the lions and tigers, and Richard seized every opportunity to interact with him, sharing interesting facts about the animals. Gradually, the tension between them eased, and Noah started feeling more at ease. "Look at that lion. He really looks like the king of the jungle, doesn't he, Richard?" Noah asked, his eyes sparkling. "Exactly, Noah. They're called the kings of the jungle because they're strong and brave," Richard replied, smiling. Noah dashed off to the next area, where the elephants were. Richard and Emily followed, keeping a leisurely pace. "He's amazing, Emily," Richard said sincerely. "Thank you for letting me spend this time with him." "He means everything to me," Emily replied, her eyes fixed on her son. "I just hope you understand the responsibility that comes with this." "I understand more than ever," Richard assured her. After hours of exploring the zoo, they stopped in a picnic area. Emily had brought snacks for Noah, and Richard took the opportunity to sit next to the boy. "Noah, what's been your favorite animal so far?" Richard asked, trying to start a more personal conversation. "The tigers. They're so fast and strong. I want to be like them when I grow up," Noah said, laughing. "And you will be, I'm sure of it," Richard said, playfully ruffling the boy's hair. As Noah ate, Emily observed the interaction carefully. Richard was trying, but there was still a long way to go. Yet, something about his behavior seemed genuine, making her wonder if he had truly changed. After they finished their snacks, Noah insisted on seeing the penguins before leaving. Richard took his hand, and the two walked together to the icy habitat. Emily followed closely behind, watching how Noah now talked to Richard as if they'd known each other for years. "The penguins are so funny," Noah exclaimed, laughing as he watched them slide on the ice. Richard laughed along, feeling more connected to his son with each passing moment. At the end of the visit, Emily called Noah aside, preparing to say goodbye to Richard. "Today was fun, Mom. Richard knows a lot about animals," Noah said excitedly. Emily nodded, her gaze shifting to Richard. "It was a good day, but as I said before, this is just the beginning." Richard smiled, sensing a small victory. "I know, Emily, and I'll keep proving I'm here to stay." Before parting, Noah unexpectedly hugged Richard. "See you soon, Richard. I hope you come back to see more animals with me." Richard was surprised but gently returned the hug, moved by the boy's spontaneity. "I'll definitely come back, Noah, I promise." Back in his car, Richard felt more determined than ever. He knew building a relationship with Noah and regaining Emily's trust would take time. But the day at the zoo had been an important step. The days following their zoo visit were calm, but Richard knew the peace wouldn't last. As he worked to strengthen his bond with Noah and rebuild Emily's trust, something unexpected emerged to complicate matters. A rival from the past had returned. Victor Hale, a former suitor of Emily and one of Richard's direct competitors in business, was back in town. Years ago, Victor had tried to win Emily's heart, but she had rejected him without hesitation. That rejection had fueled a silent resentment, and now he saw an opportunity for revenge. Upon learning about the renewed connection between Emily and Richard, Victor decided to act. Victor attended a gala event hosted by the Carter Holding Company, and as the hostess, Emily couldn't avoid crossing paths with him. He approached her with a perfectly rehearsed smile. "Emily, it's always a pleasure to see you," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Victor," Emily replied, her tone neutral. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Ah, but I couldn't miss the chance to congratulate you on all the success of the holding company. You've truly been a force in business," he complimented before adding, "and of course, I've heard that you and Richard Foster have been spending quite a bit of time together." Emily held her composure, though her gaze hardened slightly. "What happens between me and Richard is none of your business, Victor." "Oh, I understand, but you know how rumors are," Victor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I just found it interesting that he came back after all these years." Emily knew Victor was fishing for information, but she wasn't about to give him anything. "I have other matters to attend to, Victor." "Have a good evening," she said, walking away without waiting for a response. Victor wasn't one to give up easily. The next day, he contacted a tabloid journalist, providing vague and speculative information about Emily and Richard's relationship, as well as the existence of Noah. The story quickly spread, creating a media frenzy. Richard got the news while in a meeting with his team. His expression hardened as he read the headline, "Billionaire heiress and millionaire CEO, the secret connection and hidden son?" He immediately called Emily, who answered with a tense voice. "Have you seen the news?" Richard asked. "Of course I have. And I have a pretty good idea who's behind it," she replied, clearly irritated. "Victor?" Richard guessed, recalling the name she'd mentioned before. "Exactly. He's always been obsessed with trying to control me, and now he's using Noah and you to draw attention," Emily said. Richard took a deep breath, trying to contain his anger. "This can't go on, Emily. I won't allow Noah to be exposed like this." "Neither will I," she agreed. "I'm already taking legal action to contain the damage." "What about Victor?" Richard asked, his tone cold and determined. "Leave him to me. I know how to handle people like Victor," Emily replied, her voice filled with confidence. While Emily consulted her lawyers, Richard decided to confront Victor directly. He knew his rival was calculating and manipulative, but he couldn't stand by while his family's integrity was under attack. Richard found Victor at an exclusive business club, a place where the man often flaunted his influence. When Victor saw him, he raised his wine glass in mock greeting, as if he had been expecting him. "Richard, what a surprise! What brings you here?" Victor asked with a cynical smile. "Let's not pretend, Victor. We both know you're behind that sensationalist article," Richard said bluntly. Victor took a sip of his wine before responding. "Me? I simply shared some interesting tidbits. I can't help it if people love a good story." Richard stepped closer, his tone calm but laced with threat. "If you think you can use Emily or Noah to boost your own image, you're sorely mistaken. I won't let you continue this game." "Interesting to hear that from you," Victor replied provocatively. "After all, you're the one who abandoned Emily in the first place. Maybe I'm just finishing what you started." The mention of the breakup stirred the guilt Richard had been trying to overcome, but he refused to let it show. "The difference between us, Victor, is that I acknowledge my mistakes and I'm working to fix them. You, on the other hand, only know how to destroy." Victor chuckled, clearly enjoying the confrontation. "Good luck with that, Richard. But remember, in business, hesitation means losing." Richard left the club with a mix of frustration and determination. He knew Victor wouldn't give up easily, but he was ready to face him head-on. Meanwhile, Emily found an unexpected solution to handle Noah's exposure. Instead of trying to shield him further, she chose to confront the situation with transparency. In an exclusive interview with a renowned journalist, she carefully shared her story, introducing Noah to the public as a loved and protected child. "My priority has always been to protect my son," Emily stated firmly. "But I also want him to grow up knowing there's nothing to be ashamed of. He is my greatest achievement." The interview was met with support and admiration from the public, shifting the narrative around the story. Victor, frustrated that his strategy had failed, retreated temporarily, but both Richard and Emily knew he remained a latent threat. Following Emily's interview, things seemed to finally stabilize. The positive media response helped ease criticisms, and the public's support for her decision to protect Noah brought some relief. Yet, amidst the apparent calm, an unexpected proposal landed on Emily's desk. A powerful international group expressed interest in acquiring a significant stake in the Carter Holding Company. It was a generous offer, promising expansion into unexplored markets. However, it came with a concerning condition. The group demanded partial control over operations, which would inevitably place the company's decisions under external influence. Emily was torn. On one hand, the proposal meant growth and long-term financial security. On the other, she knew accepting it would mean giving up part of the autonomy she had fought so hard to achieve. That night, as she reviewed the contract details in her office, she heard light footsteps. Looking toward the door, she saw Noah clutching his favorite blanket. "Mommy, why are you still awake?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Emily smiled and motioned for him to sit on her lap. "I'm working, sweetheart. I have some important decisions to make for the company." "Is it hard?" Noah asked with the innocent curiosity of a child. Emily sighed, gently stroking his hair. "A little. Sometimes we have to make choices that affect a lot of people, and that's not always easy." Noah was quiet for a moment before asking, "Can Richard help?" The mention of Richard caught Emily off guard. She knew Noah was starting to grow attached to him, but she still wasn't sure how Richard would fit into their lives in the long run. "Maybe," she replied hesitantly, "but some decisions I need to make on my own." Noah hugged her, and for a moment, Emily felt the strength of that small gesture. Everything she did was for him, and every decision she made had Noah as her top priority. The next day, Emily called Richard and asked him to come to her office. When he arrived, he found her at her desk, surrounded by documents. "What's going on?" he asked, noticing her worried expression. "I received a proposal from an international group to acquire part of the holding," Emily explained. "It's an incredible opportunity, but it could compromise our autonomy. I need your opinion." Richard sat across from her and began reviewing the papers she handed him. After a few minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "It's an impressive offer, but I don't think it's worth it. Partial control means you'll have to answer to them on strategic decisions. That could weaken your position in the long run." Emily nodded, having anticipated this analysis, but she still wanted to hear his perspective. "I agree," she said. "But the expansion they're promising could ensure Noah's future security. That's what's dividing me." Richard looked at her seriously. "Emily, you built this holding company with your determination. You don't need an external group to secure Noah's future. He already has everything he needs. You." Richard's words struck a chord with Emily, but the weight of the decision still pressed heavily on her. "Even so, I can't ignore the potential impact of this proposal." Richard leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You're not in this alone. You don't have to carry the entire burden by yourself. I'm here, Emily, for you and for Noah." Emily felt a mix of emotions. The sincerity in Richard's words was undeniable, but trusting him again was still an internal struggle. Later that day, Emily decided to bring the matter before the holdings board. During the meeting, she presented the pros and cons of the proposal, seeking different perspectives before making a final decision. Opinions were divided, but most seemed inclined to accept the offer, emphasizing the financial benefits and potential for expansion. Emily, however, remained cautious. After listening to all the suggestions, she thanked everyone and closed the meeting, promising to announce her decision soon. Meanwhile, Victor Hale continued to watch from afar, waiting for the perfect opportunity to interfere. He had heard rumors about the proposal and knew that if he could undermine Emily's confidence within the holding, he could gain the upper hand. Victor began discreetly sowing doubts among the board members, suggesting that Emily's leadership could be risky if she refused the proposal. He knew that a single misstep was all it would take for his influence to grow. That evening, Emily went home with her mind full of worries. After putting Noah to bed, she sat on the balcony, gazing at the city lights as she tried to organize her thoughts. Then her phone rang. It was Richard. "Emily, I've been thinking about something that could help," he said directly. "What if you explore a third option? Something that allows expansion without giving up control." "How exactly?" she asked, intrigued. "You could form a strategic partnership instead of selling part of the holding. This way, you maintain control while still accessing new markets. We can revise the terms and present a counteroffer." Emily was silent for a few moments, considering the idea. It was risky, but it made sense. It's an interesting approach, she admitted, but convincing the board will be difficult. Leave that to me. I'll help you put together something compelling. Together we can turn the tables. Though still hesitant, Emily felt there was a chance to find a balance. Over the following days, Richard and Emily worked tirelessly on the new proposal. Richard used his corporate expertise to help her craft a solid plan, while Emily prepared a speech to present to the board. By the time the meeting day arrived, she was ready. During her presentation, Emily outlined the new strategy in detail, emphasizing how the partnership would preserve the holding's independence while exploring new markets. The board listened attentively, and when she finished, Emily waited in silence as they deliberated. Finally, the board's chairman stood up. "Miss Carter, your proposal is solid and innovative. We approve your decision to move forward with the strategic partnership." Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt in control again. After the meeting, Richard met her in the hallway. "Congratulations, Emily. You did it." "We did it," she corrected, offering a small smile. Despite the victory with the board, Emily knew the battle was far from over. Victor Hale still loomed like a shadow, determined to find a way to undermine her leadership. After hearing rumors that he was planning a new move, Emily decided to act before he could cause further harm. Meanwhile, Richard intensified his efforts to prove his commitment to the family. He knew that earning Emily's trust and securing a permanent place in Noah's life depended on concrete actions, not just words. That morning, Emily woke with a sense of urgency. Determined to protect everything she had built, she called a meeting with her lawyer and trusted team. During the meeting, they discussed ways to strengthen the legal framework of the holding company and safeguard its assets against any external interference, especially from Victor. "We need to review every existing contract and ensure there are no legal loopholes that can be exploited," Emily said firmly. Her lawyer, an experienced and meticulous man, nodded. "We've already started the review, but we'll intensify our efforts. Any sabotage attempts will be intercepted." Emily felt some relief, but knew she couldn't rely solely on legal measures. Victor was cunning and knew how to attack from multiple angles. Meanwhile, Richard had his own plans. Determined to confront his family, he arranged a meeting with his father, Robert Foster, the man who had pressured him most to abandon Emily in the past. The relationship between father and son had always been tense, but now Richard was ready to face the domineering man. In the grand office of the Foster mansion, Robert sat behind a massive wooden desk when Richard entered. The atmosphere was heavy, and the walls adorned with portraits of past generations seemed to watch every move. "Richard, what brings you here?" Robert asked without looking up from the report he held. "I want to talk about Emily and Noah," Richard replied, getting straight to the point. Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but kept his tone controlled. "And why would that concern me? Because your influence led me to make the worst decision of my life, and now I'm trying to fix it," Richard said, his voice steady. "You drove me away from the woman I loved and from my son." Robert remained silent for a moment before leaning back in his chair. "You've always known that certain choices must be made for the sake of the legacy, Richard. Emotions are irrelevant in the world we live in." "That's what you believe, but it's not what I want for my life," Richard retorted. "I won't let you or anyone else interfere again." Robert let out a low chuckle, but there was a trace of disdain in his tone. "And what exactly do you intend to do?" Richard stepped closer, his gaze full of determination. "Protect my family, and I'll make sure Noah never grows up under the weight of your expectations or manipulations." Robert's expression hardened. "Careful with your words, Richard. You still bear the Foster name. And that's exactly why I'm here. The Foster name means nothing if it isn't built on respect and values." The conversation ended in a stalemate, but Richard left the office feeling lighter. He had finally confronted the man who had controlled much of his life. And now he was ready to move forward. In the days that followed, Richard dedicated himself even more to creating meaningful moments with Noah. He took him to the planetarium, taught him how to ride a bike, and even spent entire afternoons helping him complete a massive puzzle. Every smile from Noah made Richard feel more connected, and Emily, watching from a distance, couldn't deny there was something genuine about Richard's transformation. One evening, after putting Noah to bed, Emily found Richard in the kitchen, making a cup of tea. She walked in, crossing her arms. "You're doing well with Noah," she said bluntly. Richard smiled, clearly surprised by the compliment. "He's an amazing kid. Spending time with him is the best part of my day." Emily was silent for a moment before adding, "But that doesn't mean I fully trust you." Richard nodded, understanding. "I don't expect you to trust me right away, Emily, but I'm willing to keep proving that I'm worthy of your trust." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and for a brief moment, Emily allowed the wall around her heart to weaken. Meanwhile, Victor was preparing to make his next move. He organized a private dinner with influential members of the Carter Holding Company's board, aiming to convince them that Emily was not equipped to handle the growing challenges in the international market. But Victor didn't expect Emily to be one step ahead. Using information gathered by her team, she discovered the meeting and decided to act. With Richard's help, who suggested a more assertive approach, Emily called an emergency board meeting for the following day. During the meeting, Emily outlined the strategies she was implementing to expand the holding, presenting concrete results and detailed plans. Her presentation was so compelling that it left no room for doubt. By the end, Victor tried to intervene. "With all due respect, Miss Carter, your ideas are ambitious, but I question whether they're practical given the risks we face." Emily remained calm and responded with a controlled smile. "Victor, I understand your concern, but I won't allow unfounded doubts to hinder this company's progress. The board trusts me, and our results speak for themselves." The board's support was unanimous, and Victor saw his influence slip through his fingers. After the meeting, Richard met Emily in the parking lot. "You were brilliant in there," he said, impressed. "Thank you," Emily replied, exhausted but satisfied. "Victor won't give up easily, but you've shown that no one will take you down without a fight." Emily smiled, feeling stronger than ever. "I've learned from the best," she said, looking at Richard. The days following their victory over Victor Hale brought an unexpected calm for Emily and Richard. Despite the recent turmoil, both felt they were finally making progress. However, rebuilding trust wasn't something that could be rushed, and both Emily and Richard knew the process would be gradual, filled with challenges and moments of vulnerability. The morning after the board meeting, Emily decided to take the day off to spend time with Noah. She wanted to make up for the time she had spent preoccupied with the holding's tensions and Victor's constant threats. When Richard called to check in on them, Emily surprised herself by inviting him to join them for a trip to the park. "Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand." Now, let's continue the story. When they arrived, Noah ran to the playground while Emily and Richard sat on a nearby bench. The atmosphere was light, but there was still something unresolved between them. Richard seized the opportunity to break the silence. "Emily, I know things are still fragile between us, but I want to thank you for giving me the chance to be here. I won't let you or Noah down." Emily looked at him, considering his words. She recognized Richard's genuine effort, but she also knew the barrier between them ran deeper than the recent events. "You're trying, Richard, and I see that," she replied softly. "But trust takes time, especially after everything that's happened." Richard nodded, understanding. Before he could respond, Noah ran back to them, holding a small flower he had found on the grass. "Look what I found," he exclaimed, his face lit up with joy. Emily laughed, taking the flower from her son and kissing his forehead. Moments like these reminded her why she fought so hard to protect Noah. After the outing, Richard felt it was the right time to be serious with Emily about a secret he had kept for years. He knew that to truly regain her trust, he needed to be completely honest. That evening, he sent Emily a message asking her to meet him in a neutral place. They agreed on the same restaurant where they had first reunited. When Emily arrived, Richard was already waiting, his serious expression signaling that this would be an important conversation. "Thank you for coming," he began, visibly nervous. "There's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Emily crossed her arms, her posture signaling she was ready to listen, but cautious. I'm listening. Richard took a deep breath before beginning. When we broke up, my family not only pressured me to leave you, but also did something I only discovered recently. My father hired an investigator to follow you, trying to find anything that could ensure you'd never be a threat to our family's legacy. Emily remained silent, but her expression hardened. What exactly was he looking for? She asked, her voice low but firm. Anything that could tarnish your reputation or justify the breakup, Richard admitted regretfully. But the worst part is that they used what they found to manipulate me even further. I recently learned that they knew about Noah long before I did. The revelation hit Emily like a punch. She stood up, furious. Are you telling me your family knew about Noah from the beginning? That they monitored me, manipulated you, and you never realized it? The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Richard stood as well, trying to calm her. I didn't know, Emily. If I had, I would have done something. But now that I do, I'm trying to make it right. My father will have no more influence over me or us, I promise. Emily took a few steps away, trying to process everything. It was hard to accept that, even after all this time, the shadow of the foster family's control still loomed over their lives. After a few moments, she turned back to him, her expression softening slightly. I believe you didn't know, Richard, but that doesn't make this any easier. Protecting Noah has always been my priority, and I can't let anything put him at risk. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of Emily's responsibility. And that's why I'm here, Emily. I want to help protect Noah. I don't want to be a risk to him or to you. I want to be a support. She studied him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Despite everything, there was something about Richard that made her believe he truly was trying to change. Very well, Richard, she said finally. We'll start fresh, but with one condition. Anything involving Noah or our relationship must be built on honesty. No more secrets. Richard extended his hand, sealing the agreement. I promise. In the days that followed, Emily and Richard worked together to establish a more stable routine. Richard took on a more active role in Noah's life. From taking him to school to attending parent-teacher meetings, he was determined to be the present father Noah deserved. On the other hand, Emily began to notice that, despite the scars of the past, something new was growing between them. Richard showed a more sensitive and attentive side, traits she hadn't seen in him before. One afternoon, as they played in Emily's backyard, Noah asked a question that caught them both off guard. Mommy, can Richard live with us? Emily and Richard exchanged glances, caught off guard. Before Emily could respond, Richard knelt down beside the boy. That depends on your mom, Noah. But what's important is that I'll always be here for you. Emily smiled, gently brushing her son's hair. Noah's innocent question lightened the mood, but also made Emily reflect on what the future held for them as a family. Later that evening, Emily sat on the balcony, gazing at the stars when Richard joined her. A comfortable silence hung between them until Richard broke it. You know, Emily, when I think about everything that's happened, I realize that despite the mistakes, we're lucky. We have a second chance, something not everyone gets. Emily nodded, her gaze still fixed on the sky. And what are we going to do with this second chance, Richard? She asked softly. Richard smiled. We're going to build something new together. No pressures, no manipulations, just us. Emily finally turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. Then let's begin, but this time, without fear of facing whatever comes. With that promise, they both felt ready to face the future, confident that together they could overcome any obstacle. The months that followed were filled with moments of growing closeness between Richard and Emily. The trust that once seemed unreachable was slowly rebuilt through simple, meaningful gestures. Richard made it a point to be present for every important moment in both Noah's and Emily's lives. He spent afternoons helping Noah with school projects and evenings creating memories with Emily, whether by cooking dinners or spending hours talking under the stars. One evening, while watching a movie together, Emily felt Richard's gentle touch on her hand. He looked at her with a calm smile, his eyes reflecting something deeper. Emily, do you know what inspires me most about you? He asked, his voice soft and full of affection. What? She replied, smiling curiously. Your strength. Even after everything we've been through, you've never stopped being the incredible woman I first met. It makes me want to be better every day. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. It was rare for Richard to express his emotions so openly, and each word seemed to melt the last of the barriers between them. "And you surprise me every day, Richard. I think, deep down, I always knew there was more to you, something beyond the man weighed down by his family's expectations," she said, gently touching his face. The two leaned closer, and Richard kissed her softly, a kiss that carried promises of a future they were both ready to build together. A few weeks later, Richard decided it was time to take the next step. He wanted to show Emily how much she meant to him and how committed he was to their future. With Noah's help, who was thrilled to be part of the plan, Richard began organizing an unforgettable surprise. On a clear spring evening, Richard took Emily to a secluded countryside property. When they arrived, she was enchanted to see a small pavilion adorned with soft lights, rose petals scattered across the floor, and a delicately set dining table. "Richard, what is all this?" she asked, surprised, as he guided her to the table. "Just a special evening for the most special woman in my life," he replied with a smile. During dinner, they laughed, talked, and reminisced about the past. But at the end of the meal, Richard stood, took Emily's hand, and led her to the center of the pavilion. He knelt before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emily Carter, you are the love of my life, the woman who taught me the true meaning of family, strength, and redemption. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Emily was speechless, tears streaming down her face as she nodded repeatedly. "Yes, Richard, I will," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a tight embrace. Noah, who had been watching from a hiding spot, ran out and shouted, "I knew Mommy would say yes." The three of them laughed together, and in that moment, everything felt perfect. Months later, Richard and Emily married in a breathtaking garden ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Emily wore an elegant lace gown, while Noah, in a tiny suit, carried the rings with a beaming smile. As Emily walked toward him, Richard felt a wave of gratitude. She was his anchor, his partner, and now his wife. When they exchanged vows, both spoke from the heart, promising to support and love one another through all of life's moments. The reception was filled with joy, laughter, and dancing. Richard surprised Emily with a song he had personally chosen, leading her to the center of the dance floor as everyone watched with admiration. "I've always dreamed of having this moment with you," he whispered as they danced. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling. "And now it's ours forever." A few days after the wedding, Emily began noticing small changes in her body. Feeling constantly tired and nauseous, she decided to visit her doctor. What she discovered left her in shock and joy. She was pregnant. She planned to share the news with Richard in a special way. That evening, she prepared a simple dinner at home, leaving a note under his plate. When Richard opened it, he read the words, "Our love is growing. I'm pregnant." Richard looked at Emily, completely overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emily nodded, and he pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing her repeatedly. "I can't believe I'm going to be a dad again. This is amazing, Emily." Noah, who had been listening from the hallway, ran into the room. "Am I going to have a little brother or sister?" he asked excitedly. Emily laughed and picked him up. "Yes, sweetheart, you're going to be the best big brother in the world." 9 months later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Lily. Richard was completely smitten as he held his daughter for the first time, and Noah couldn't contain his excitement about meeting his baby sister. The days that followed were filled with pure love and joy. The house was alive with laughter, and Richard and Emily felt they had finally found complete happiness. "Our family is complete now," Richard said, holding Lily in his arms as he watched Noah playing on the floor. Emily smiled, sitting beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes, it is, and I couldn't be happier." With Noah and Lily by their side, Emily and Richard knew they had overcome every challenge and built something truly special. Do you think Emily made the right choice by forgiving Richard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to catch all our stories, and check out more heartfelt stories by clicking here on the end screen.